Today, I'm delighted to be here with one of the most dynamic couples I've ever met, Gay and Katie Hendricks, who have been married for 32 years. Now, for more than 35 years, they've been major contributors to the field of relationship transformation and body-mind therapies. They are authors of more than 33 books, including such bestsellers as Conscious Loving, Lasting Love, and Spirit-Centered Relationships. Just over the past 2 decades, they've worked with more than 20,000 individuals, 80 companies, and 3,000 couples to develop their methods for transforming both personal and professional relationships. And today, they're here to help transform ours. Gay and Katie, welcome to Success. Great to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you. It's our pleasure, Darren.
So this issue is focused on business relationships. And so I want you to help set the stage on why it's so important for us to look at our professional relationships, and what's the one thing that we should be looking at as the center to our success or failure of our professional relationships. What's the heart of the matter when assessing our professional relationships in your view?
Well, in our view, if you can be your whole person, if you can be real and bring your whole self to the business, to your relationships, and to your collaborations, you get the tremendous benefit of a person's creativity and their ability to innovate, because you're not having them distracted by competition or by wanting approval or by turf warfare. You're really getting the person's full creative presence, and that's a tremendous benefit of healthy relationships.
Also, too, relationships really drive communication, and communication drives business. Because if you took all of the communication problems out of business, things would move at a great deal more rapid pace. People would have a great deal more access to their creative potency inside themselves. But it's a lot of these relationship dynamics that eat up the energy of business and take it down real narrow, twisting paths where a lot of problems occur.
So you've worked with more than 100 business executives. Talk to us about what you think are the 2 biggest mistakes that successful people make in their relationships, and how we can overcome them so that we don't make those same mistakes.
One of the biggest mistakes that even highly successful people make is to lose touch with their natural body wisdom. You can learn so much about yourself and other people from learning to observe people's natural body wisdom, and certainly in yourself. One of the things, for example, we were once doing a lot of coaching down at Dell Computer in Texas some years ago, and we worked with an executive. One of the top guys was a fellow named Mort, and he had a problem with getting angry at people, and then people would be upset about that. It was no big deal to Mort. You know, he knew that if he blew his stack, 10 seconds later, he was fine with the person. It wasn't like he held a grudge, but other people would have reactions to his blow-ups. And in a moment of coaching, based on a piece of body language I saw in him, I showed him how his anger was really rooted in an old sadness that he looked like he was carrying in himself. And it made such a difference, because I invited him to share that with people that he had blown up at as a way of helping them understand what was underneath that. And as he did that, interestingly enough, the whole blowing up thing faded away. And so it ceased to be an issue, because he got to communicate about something that was very important inside, but he hadn't known that was driving him.
Along those lines, Gay, is there a short course on that? I mean, what to observe, what to look for, how to draw somebody out, since we're on that right now?
Yes. One very simple thing to do is to notice where people spontaneously and often unconsciously, what part of themselves they touch. Like, for example, people will frequently touch the area where certain feelings are felt in the body. Like, you notice sometimes people will touch their hearts at a time when there's sadness or some heart feeling in their message. They may not be saying that out loud, but that's really what's being communicated. Or another person might rub the back of their neck, which is a place where people often store unspoken anger. Another person might touch their belly, which is a place where usually people experience fear. So if you begin to kind of tune into that language, you have a whole new vocabulary of things you can be working with people.
Another thing that was just occurring to me is to notice when I stop breathing or when the person I'm collaborating with stops breathing. If I'm in a meeting and I notice that the breath has stopped in the room, that lets me know that something's going on. And I can say, I just noticed that I stopped breathing. I wonder what's happening right now. Does anybody have something going on you'd like to share?
So we've talked about tuning into your body wisdom, which would be a mistake if you don't do that. Is there another mistake that you see that's common, particularly in a lot of professionals in the workplace?
Yes, I think one thing that we notice a lot is that executives tend to take more than 100% responsibility. They kind of take all of the responsibility in the room, and that prevents other people from really stepping up and contributing and really creating from wholeness. If each person takes 100% responsibility, then you have so much more creativity. You have so much smarts on the line than you do if one person is trying to control the whole thing.
I want to elaborate on that because it's such a key point that a lot of the people that we work with, their problem is not that they're shirking responsibility, it's that they're taking 128% responsibility with some other executive who's then not being able to take more than 72% or whatever. So in other words, if I'm taking more than 150% of responsibility in a two-person relationship, that only leaves 50% for you. And so the kind of getting the physics of that straightened out in your head is really important, because we have to point out to people frequently that the cost of taking too much responsibility is, number one, that you don't give other people space to step up and take 100%, but it has a big cost on your personality and on your whole physical health too, because if you go home every day feeling like a martyr because you've done more than 100% responsibility, you really take a tax on your body every day. And we work with people all the time who have kind of their bodies have begun to give them feedback that they are taking way too much responsibility.
Yeah, I have an example of that. I was just remembering working with a department head at Motorola who had to run his department from his bed for 6 months because his back had gone out and he actually could not get out of bed to go and run the company because he had been living with so much stress for such a long time that his body had basically given out. So to really support yourself and your own physical health, taking 100% responsibility really has huge benefits for you personally and also for your business.
So we've talked about the mistakes that are common. Let's switch to the more positive side of things. What have you found that fosters partnering and collaboration most effectively in business relationships?
Well, number one and number two are kind of related to each other, because one is authentic speaking, being able to speak authentically about what's real. And that relates to the other end of that, which is conscious listening, which is the ability to listen in such a way that it draws the truth out of people. And there's a real art to both.
And here's an attitude that executives can adopt right now that makes a huge difference, and that is to get curious. So most executives think they have to know already, they have to know the outcome. The moment that people get curious, the other person really can feel that interest, and it really creates a momentum between you, a deeper connection and deeper collaboration.
If we were to try to boil this down into what you think are your two very best keys to creating thriving relationships or partnerships in a business environment, besides what we've talked about thus far, conscious listening, tuning into your and other people's body wisdom, if you're to boil it down to the two best keys to creating greater relationships in the workplace, what would they be?
There are really three things that you have to think of as one thing. And it is, number one, to know your feelings, number two, to speak honestly, and number three, to keep your agreements.
And those sound really simple, but when you put them together, they're very, very powerful, because when you know your feelings, you really know that you're listening to yourself, you're bringing your whole self there, and you're being real. And when you speak honestly, you create a kind of openness that generates more collaboration.
But then the third thing, which always has to be factored in there, is your ability to make and keep meaningful agreements. Because if you've been in business for a while, you know the incredible cost of people not keeping their agreements. So it's a huge thing that needs to be addressed. And so it's those three things: knowing yourself, being able to listen to others as well as yourself, and being able to keep your agreements. Those happen as a package, and where it happens, success happens.
Do what you can to give us a tangible idea of just how dramatic the results of your work have been. I want our audience to get a glimpse of how well your techniques really work. Do you have an example of a problem that an executive was going through, what you advised them to do differently, and then what the results were?
One of the best examples that I ever saw happen was back in the 90s when I was doing a lot of consulting down at Dell Computer. They were in a period of explosive growth, and it was bringing to light so many communication problems that had been bubbling below the surface. One executive said that his biggest fear would be being caught in an elevator alone and having to ride up to the next floor with the CEO, Michael Dell. And now I happen to like Michael a lot, and so anything I say is about his absolute genius. But one of the things that people noticed back in those days that he did not make small talk at all. And I remember my very first conversation of trying to engage him in small talk went something like this. I said, "Boy, it's hot outside today, isn't it?" And he said, "Yep, that's why we're inside." So a very direct kind of thing like that. But it doesn't make for a good flow sometimes in around the office. So anyway, just a little bit of easy coaching with the top few executives about how to do something that we've already mentioned, which is conscious listening, just listening to the other person and finding out what they want to talk about. A second thing, though, that I showed them how to do is how to customize appreciation, so that if you only had 10 seconds with somebody and you met them randomly, one of the best things you could tell them would be one thing you really appreciate about them. And so I coached up the top executives there about how to deliver 10-second appreciations to people. And you wouldn't believe the difference it made down through the company. For example, that guy, that very executive that had once said he didn't want to be trapped in an elevator with Michael, it shifted completely within 6 months to where they had this very easygoing relationship. You know, they went camping with the executives one time and things like that, took their kids with them. And so it opened up a whole new set of interactions that weren't happening beforehand.
And I have another example that I was just thinking of an executive in Motorola who started working with me because he was about to get fired. And we really focused on the openness to learning scale, what we call how to shift from your defensive patterns, your resistance to getting feedback, to really getting excited about feedback as a source of learning. And he got really excited about it. I remember he put it up on a chart on his wall, and he started looking at what he was doing, which of the minus numbers, whether he was getting resistant or going silent or going out of the room. And he started looking at the plus numbers, how to really open his body posture, how to getting curious, to actually appreciating the feedback, even if it was negative. And over the period of just a couple of months, he went from not being fired to being promoted to running a whole division. And that was very exciting because I knew he then had a lifelong tool that he could continue to use.
Now, I want to go back to a few things that we've already covered thus far and dig in a little deeper. One of the relationships that often gets overlooked is the relationship with ourselves, as we've talked about. So talk to us about ways to strengthen our relationship with ourselves when we are seemingly sometimes overwhelmed with business and life in general.
Yes, that's a great question, because one thing that I have noticed over the years is that as people get more successful in business, they devote less and less time to the very thing that made them successful in the first place. And so I can't count the number of very successful executives usually oftentimes in their 40s or 50s, who have told me in the context of coaching sessions that, gosh, if I could only just get 10 minutes of creative think time. And so actually, I started including that in what I teach. So we actually now have executives that learn how to do that 10 minutes of creative think time. And if they will just do that, it frees up a type of creativity that really flows through the whole company. So how to do that specifically is you go in a room by yourself where you're not going to be interrupted by anything for 10 solid minutes. And in that 10 minutes, you do absolutely nothing but sit and think about whatever creative projects you have going on in the workplace or wherever you're doing this.
And one of the things that we sometimes suggest for people who are very aware of their environment is to put on earphones that actually cover their ears so that they can go inside.
That's great. Now, another topic I want to go back to is this idea of taking responsibility. You've already addressed it in the regard that you don't want to take too much responsibility, thus taking it away from those around you, not giving them a platform on which to thrive on, which I think is a great point. But there's this idea of taking responsibility as a dynamic topic. So talk to us about some of the other aspects of taking responsibility when it comes to your professional relationships.
Yes, taking healthy responsibility is an art form that you have to practice throughout your life, because we're not born with that particular muscle. It has to be developed. And here's the real problem in relationship issues, whether it's at home or in the workplace, is that relationship conflict comes from two people trying to occupy the victim position at the same time. One person thinks they're the victim in a particular situation and points the finger of perpetration at the other person. But the other person doesn't just sit there and ever say, "Oh yeah, I agree. I have completely caused your misery." That generally doesn't happen in life. And so what does the other person do? They point the finger of perpetration back at the other person. They go for the victim position, say, "Wait a minute, I'm the one who's been wronged here."
So instead of that, if each person in the meeting or each person in the negotiation is asking the question, how in this dynamic can I move toward taking 100% responsibility, then a whole new arena opens up, because responsibility is really an action. It's not a point on a graph. It's really, what action could I take that would really allow me to claim responsibility for what we're doing? What action could I suggest that's really going to move this forward? How can I participate as a whole human being rather than trying to force something on somebody else where I'm taking control and taking too much responsibility, or collapsing and feeling helpless and powerless, which would be taking the victim position?
I like this. Relationship issues are rooted in the competition for the victim position.
Yes.
Yes.
That is so true. So final question for you both today, and it would be great if each of you answered this individually. We've covered a lot of great tools for building relationships, but if there was one thing that you would recommend our listeners start with today, just that one thing they could do today, take that small step towards the 1,000 miles to the great destination of fantastic, loving, wonderful relationships, what would be that one thing?
Every journey begins at home inside ourselves with our deep intentions, whatever those intentions are. And so I think one thing that people could do right this moment that would sustain them throughout their lives is to make a commitment this moment that their journey is going to be about experiencing more love inside themselves and making a space for other people to experience more love inside themselves.
And I would ask people to consider what's the simplest action step that you could take today that's going to move you toward something that you really want. I like to call it measurable and pleasurable. So rather than saying, well, I think I'll spend a little bit more time learning how to